So once again, good evening and welcome. We are continuing on with where we left off last week. As I mentioned, I was hoping to get to the Dhammapada, but there was so much nuggets of wisdom that I thought it would be wrong for me to just jump ahead. So we were going along the various discourses that the Buddha gave at various times. Now, why the collective editing body decided to lump these together, I'm not sure how they're discourses from different occurrences when the Buddha was visiting a different place, or, some of them were at the same place, but on different occasions. Yet, at the same time, there's some repetitiveness to what the Buddha has to say. So right now we're on, so the handout that I gave you last week, we're actually on number 4 of this handout. I believe that's where we are, yeah. We're on number 4. And it's at the top of the page, and it says endeavor and its incentive. Do you see that handout? Maybe I should bring it up. I will bring it up on the screen for those of you who may not have it with you. Just give me a couple seconds and I will bring it up onto the screen. There it is. So I'm going to just bring it up on the screen with you so that if somebody doesn't have it, you'll be able to see it on the screen. So we are actually on page 4 of this, and it starts off right here. You can see that on the screen, can you? Yeah, okay. Thank you. So according to this, there was a time where the Buddha was up at the bamboo grove in Rajagriha. Rajagriha was a place that the Buddha spent quite a bit of time and gave numerous famous lectures. But again, first of all, he was talking about the monks who were in the forest. So at the time of the Buddha, there were 2 types of monks. One who went off on their own on solitude into the forest, practiced on their own, and attained enlightenment on their own. Then there's another group of followers that actually followed some teachers and lived more in a communal setting. And so he's first of all talking about those that go into the forest. And he says, living alone, these are some of the fears that you might have. And he starts off by saying, I might be bitten by a snake or scorpion and die. Living alone, I might become ill and even die from food poisoning, cold, or consumption. Living alone, I might be killed by a lion, a tiger, a leopard, or a bear. Living alone, I might encounter some ruffians who may kill me in fists of rage. And living alone, I might be killed by some devil or demons who make the forest their home. When such fears arise, one must think, I must reach what I have not yet reached, and must awaken to what I have not yet awakened, and to be determined to exert more zeal and effort. So we know, and I mentioned this last week too, I believe. So on the cover of this Buddha Dharma is a very famous painting of when the Buddha attained enlightenment. And there's the famous story of the Buddha and being enticed by Mara and the king of Samsara, and Mara sending his daughters to, first of all, try to entice the Buddha through their beauty, etc. And of course, the Buddha wouldn't budge. And then also then the Mara sends his minions to try to instill fear into him, and the Buddha refuses to budge. So when he's talking about these fears that arise, this is through his own experience that he himself had was faced with these fears. And what he did, or what came about from that, was he realized he had to have more sheer determination to ensure that he will continue on and attain what had yet to be attained. So then he goes on and says there's other fears that might be confronted with. And he goes and he actually talks about some of the basic tenets of our teachings. And first of all, he says, I am now full of vigor and young, but soon the body will grow old. Then I will not be able to think on the teachings of the Buddha, to practice alone in the forest, or to appreciate living in the Dharma. I must realize before old age sets in, I must exert more zeal and effort to reach what is yet to be reached, and to awaken what I have yet to awaken to. I must do this before old age approaches. With a true understanding of the Dharma, I shall be able to live with peace of mind even in old age. So again, they're talking about when we are young, being careful, being astute, being determined when we are young, because it says as we get older, our faculties decrease. In fact, I was just talking with Judy before we started the session, and Judy told me, don't get old. She's got to go and see various physicians, etc. And so it is true. I'm sure many of you sit in front of the TV and catch yourself dozing off. When we get older, our attention span tends to wane. But that being said, you're never too old to start. So I hope that even if this might be the first series of Buddhist sessions for you, that it is the first step is very important. So it doesn't matter how old you are. And one thing that you can do if you're older, though, is you can listen to it over and over and over again. And soon enough, it will sink in, right? But so now the Buddha is saying, when we're young, we tend to forget about what is important. And he says, we must try to be mindful when we are young. So then the next one, he's talking about health. He said, I am now in good health and no sign of infirmity. However, I am bound to become ill sooner or later. Then I will not be able to think of the teaching of the Buddha, to practice alone in the forest, or to appreciate living in the Dharma. I must realize that before illness comes, I must exert more zeal and effort to reach what is yet to be reached, and to awaken what I have yet to be awakened to. I must do this before old age approaches. I think there's something wrong here. Before illness approaches, I think that should be. With a true understanding of the Dharma, I shall be able to live with peace of mind, even in my sickbed. So I think I had a typographical error there. It should be before illness approaches, I think. But again, here, when we're healthy, we take it for granted, and it's only when we start feeling discomfort that we start at that point start thinking, ruminating about various things. But what the Buddha said is, don't wait until that time. Be focused now. Then when that time comes, you're less likely to be swayed by it. So try to understand the teachings while you have health. It's important. It's so that you can guard it even if you are in the sick bed. And then he goes on and talks about famine. He says there's abundance of grains, and I find no difficulty in alms begging. But the time may come when there is a famine and food is not available. At such time, people will migrate to wherever there is abundance of food. We too will have to join the horde and live with the multitude. In such a situation, it may be difficult to think of the teaching of the Buddha, to practice alone in the forest, or to appreciate living in the Dharma. Before such a situation arises, I must exert more zeal and effort to reach what has yet to be reached and to awaken what I have yet to be awakened to. I must do this before old age approaches. Maybe it is old age. It says old age here again. So with a true understanding of Dharma, I shall be able to live with peace of mind even in times of famine. So again, when things are going well, people are more than happy to contribute, to give alms, etc. But as famine hits, or as there's a shortage of food, things may not always be that way. And people then tend to think of only their own well-being or their own health. And so keeping in mind that those things may happen, I must practice now. So again, the whole point is, when you have the opportunity to listen to the Dharma, to listen to the teachings, that's the best time to do it. Don't wait until you're in dire straits, but to do it now, so that when those events occurs, when things like a pandemic comes by, we're not carried away by it, but we have sort of a peace of mind, even despite the hardships we may encounter. And then he goes on to say, people are now living in harmony and being kind to each other. However, we may be attacked by bandits from the mountains or encounter an earthquake. When such events occur, people will migrate to where it is safe to live. We too shall have to join the crowd. Under such conditions, it will be more difficult to think of the teaching of the Buddha, to practice in solitude, or appreciate living in the Dharma. Before such a situation arises, I must exert more zeal and effort to reach what is yet to be reached, and to awaken what I have yet to awaken to. I must do this before old age approaches. Again, old age. Maybe that isn't a typo. With a true understanding of the Dharma, I shall be able to live with peace of mind even in such situations. So there are situations that arises exterior to ourselves that affect us. And the example here is the earthquake. Many of you, or most of you, all of you probably recall the terrible earthquake that happened in Eastern Japan in 2011. But I think one of the things that people were amazed with the Japanese was, after the earthquake, there was no looting, there was no rioting, people were lining up for food rations, and they were very calm despite their tremendous situation that they were put under. And I think part of that comes from the whole Japanese psyche of interconnectedness. And so it's not always thinking for just the self, but realizing everybody's in the same boat. And so if we're always mindful of that in our daily life, then when we are faced with trauma, then again, we are not affected as greatly, or we can control ourselves. So although the Sangha is in harmony and all are living peacefully in one teaching, the time may come when the Sangha may be in disharmony and become disorganized. In such a situation, it will be more difficult to think of the teachings of the Buddha, to practice in solitude, or appreciate living in the Dharma. Before such a situation arises, I must exert more zeal and effort to reach what has yet to be reached and to awaken what I've yet to be awakened to. I must do this before old age approaches. With a true understanding of the Dharma, I shall be able to live with peace of mind, even in a Sangha that has lost its harmony. So you might be thinking to yourself, Buddhists are supposed to be peaceful. So what's it talking about? Why is the Buddha talking about Sangha and disharmony? But Buddhists are human as well. And there has been records of numerous, how should I say, not fighting, but disharmony within the Sangha. And that's why we also find many different schools of Buddhism, because often they'll split. Okay? So even in Japan, there is one school called the Tendai School, and that's located its headquarters is located on Mount Hiei, which is just northeast of Kyoto. And many schools, independent schools, branched out from this Tendai School on Mount Hiei, and including our particular denomination, Jodo Shinshu, or the true Pure Land denomination. But there's the Zen school, there's Nichiren, there's all these various schools that have developed independently on their own. And unfortunately, every school will look at it as our teaching is perhaps the most superior or the best. And it's not even most superior or best, but it is one path. And this path may be the path that is right for me. It doesn't mean it's the path for everybody, but this is the path for myself. So every school will sort of have that, is that, these are different paths you can take. But there can be disharmony, and it has occurred. You're probably, many of you are aware of the Tibetan Buddhism. Well, the Tibetan Buddhism also has different factions. And in fact, they're not only different schools, but they're also political as well. So the lineage that the Dalai Lama belongs to is what they call the yellow hats. And they tend to be the ones in political power as well in Dharamsala now, not in Tibet. But anyways, so the Buddha is saying, even in a state of disharmony, if I'm focused on the Dharma, I can have a peace of mind. So basically, all it's talking about is anchoring yourself, having a deep, being well-rooted, so that you're not swayed by the changes in life. In Japanese, there's a terminology. They say hara o suware. Hara is your stomach, and it says to sit your stomach. Basically, it means to lower your center of gravity. If you have lower center of gravity, you have good balance in your life. So when we're thinking about listening to the Dharma, what we're doing is we're lowering our center of gravity so that we have balance, so that we're not top heavy and being swayed by all the things that go on in life. Okay, so these things that the Buddha is talking about is that be aware that these changes will come. Be aware that these changes are constantly happening. but always try to focus on the teachings of the Dharma, and you will not be swayed as much. The next section I found very interesting, and in fact, I wrote my article in the newsletter. So if you read the newsletter, I think it went out yesterday, or I wrote an article on this because, the Buddha in this passage talks directly to depression. And I find that fascinating because one of the common refrains or complaints that I hear time to time is that religion, people say I'm not really religious because religion tends to be outdated and it doesn't speak to the problems of the modern era. But I would say that the greatest, or one of the greatest ailments of the 21st century, they have said mental health has become a major issue in the 21st century. And here he is, 2,500 years ago, the Buddha is talking directly to the issue of depression. And so the people that say, the teachings don't deal with our modern problems, I don't think they've really delved into the teachings enough to realize the Buddha is talking fundamentally about problems that have not changed for 2,500 years. It existed back then as well, okay? So in this passage, there's a disciple who approaches his teacher and says, my body is so weakened today that I feel I'm completely befuddled and that I can no longer think with reason, nor am I able to see the Dharma. I am depressed. He uses the word depressed right there. Have become unwilling to practice the pure Dharma and have even begun to harbor doubts about the Dharma. So this elder took the disciple to see the Buddha, at which point the Buddha said, "You have not been careful with the five senses. You have eaten without knowing the proper limits, indulged in idle slumber, and have not sought the good Dharma. Unless you are arduously striving to practice day and night the Buddha's path, you will necessarily be in such a plight. Always bear in mind, therefore, I shall guard my five senses, refrain from indulging in slumber, seek the good Dharma, and practice day and night, and strive to follow the Buddha's path." Okay. So when you break this passage down, it actually, it continues on actually. Following the admonition by the Buddha, the disciple went into the forest to vigorously applied himself to the practice and follow the path of the Buddha. In the end, he was able to clear his mind. When the disciple next met the Buddha, he was praised, and the Buddha said to him, "If you follow thoroughly my instructions, good results necessarily will appear." Okay, so what the Buddha was telling the disciple, of course, when the Buddha or the disciple explained his situation, when we think of classic symptoms of depression, eating disorder is one of the symptoms. Sleeping disorders is another symptom. And not being able to focus is another symptom. And so all these the Buddha describes to his disciple. And he says, what you have to do is you have to guard your senses. Okay? So he's getting really fundamental. He says you have to be mindful of your senses, or more importantly, the desires that arise from those senses. So the sense of, sight, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Those are five senses, right? And if we are not mindful of our reactions, we can get carried away by these senses. And we all know, all of us, I think, have had, been carried away by those five senses. And if it gets to an extreme, that can create addiction and consequently lead into depression as well. So even when you think about the what modern psychology tells us about depression, they start off with very basics, being mindful of your daily activities. And it starts off by looking at everything that we do. And the Buddha says, you know, you have to be diligent day and night. And if you think about like the AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, they also say, you know, it's a disease that you have to fight constantly. It's not just when you're in the session, but you have to be mindful of it constantly. And that's what basically the Buddha is saying, is that if you really want to clear your mind and focus, you have to be mindful throughout the day and night. Be mindful of each of our actions. And by being mindful of our actions or our senses, you're able to clear your mind. And in another passage, I can't remember if it was before or after this, the Buddha talks about trying to dye fabric. And he says, unless you clean the fabric first, if there's stains on the fabric to begin with, when you dye it, it won't come out a clean, a beautiful color, because there was already a stain to begin with. So the Buddha says you have to wash that fabric first to cleanse it before you can actually dye it with whatever dye you're using. And that will produce a beautiful color. So this is what the Buddha is saying here about the depression is, first of all, you have to cleanse your mind. And to cleanse your mind, you have to be mindful of our senses. And by being mindful of our senses, then we don't fall into the despair of the desires that those senses can lead to, right? And you know, when he talks about, you know, the idle slumber, and I find myself nowadays more and more, I'm guilty of that. I'll be sitting maybe in front of the TV, and the next thing I realize I've nodded off, right? And I think we all, I hope I'm not alone in this. I see Ted. I think Ted does that too, I'm sure, right? But so anyways, the Buddha here, I found it very fascinating that he's actually giving direct direction on how to deal with depression. And it starts off with something very simple of being constantly, diligently mindful of our senses, okay? And then he goes on and he says, on another occasion, to emphasize a point of diligence, the Buddha talked of 5 things that all beings, whether man or woman, householder or mendicant, should keep in mind. They are, I am aging, I cannot avoid old age. People have pride in the youth and do evil deeds with body, mouth, and mind. It is only when one realizes that one cannot transcend old age that one realizes that one must either destroy his pride or lessen it. So I think we've all know when we're young, we do foolish things sometimes. It's only when we realize that our impermanence that we hopefully get to be a little wiser as we grow older in what we do. Out of youth, out of pride, out of various things, you know, we can get carried away. I actually was invited, this is a number of years ago, so I was still in my 30s, I would say, maybe 40s. I was in my 40s. And I was invited to a retreat at Ekoji, which is a temple in Washington, Virginia, actually, by Washington, D.C. It was founded by Reverend Suji, who was formerly from Canada. But when I was still in Toronto, they used to have these fall retreats there. And so I was invited to go out. And one evening we had some free time. And there were some teenagers and they wanted to go and play basketball. So I said, sure, I'll go and play too. And, I tried to keep up with them. But the next morning I was so sore from my head to my toe, I was sore, and I regretted trying to keep up with these youthful teenagers. So again, seeing the limitations of our body as we age, but being mindful of that. So this is again repeating what the Buddha has said on that other occasion when he was in the bamboo grove. Very similar thing. And then he continues, I am bound to be ill, and I cannot avoid illness. People have pride in their health and do evil deeds with body, mouth, and mind. It is only when one realizes that one cannot overcome illness that one destroys or weakens that pride. So again, illness, being mindful that, we all will get ill. That is a reality. I am destined to die. I cannot avoid death. People think as long as they're living that they will live forever and have pride in their life. Intoxicated with this pride, one will do evil with body, mouth, and mind. It is only upon deep reflection of death that one can destroy or diminish such pride. So he repeats here, that we'll do evil deeds with body, mouth, and mind. In the Buddhist philosophy or Buddhist teaching, you've probably heard of the word karma. Karma means action with volition, but usually they break karma down into three separate sections. So there's the mind, the speech, and the body. So this is why those three are repeated here. Okay, you can think certain thoughts, and in the Buddhist teaching, the mind is the most important, right? So speech and body actually are subordinate to the mind. Okay, so if you do something physically, but you don't have an intent to it, that's called an accident. Right? And it's not as bad as if you have that intention behind it, then it becomes a crime. Okay, so in our Western society, we tend to emphasize more the physical and the speech, and it's more difficult when we start dealing with mind. And this is why hate crimes are actually very difficult for them to prosecute, because you have to identify or make sure that the motive is hate. And that's a hard thing for prosecutors to pinpoint, right? So the mind is the most difficult thing to prosecute here in the West. But in the Buddhist tradition, the mind is the most important, because the mind leads to the others. If you don't have a certain thought, you won't say certain things or you won't act in certain behaviors. But it's because you have that thought that the rest follows. So that he's repeating those three things, the body, mouth, and mind, as he talks about this. But we have to understand, again, health, illness, death, health will diminish, illness will come, and death will inevitably come. We can't avoid it. None of us can. But being mindful of that, reflecting on that, is a way to understand the preciousness of this moment right now. Persons I love and things I like to possess are all impermanent. For the objects of love and pleasure, everyone rouses desire and does wrong deeds with body, mouth, and mind. When one realizes that all things are impermanent and constantly changing, that one can destroy or diminish the greed. So again, love is a very interesting word in Buddhism, because love is really not used as often because love can turn to hatred on a flip of a dime. Okay. You, I mean, this is why so many people get divorced. When they get married, they say, "Oh, I love you," and this is forever and eternity, etc., etc. 5 years down the road, they might be saying a completely different thing, right? So love is a passion. In fact, in Buddhism, love is actually seen as one of the defilements because one can. I guess you have to define the love, right? And that's why compassion tends to be used a lot more favorably in Buddhism than love, because love is actually a very strong word that has a opposite of hatred, right? And often that happens because that love may not be reciprocated as you wish, and therefore you can end up love becoming anger and hatred as well, if one allows it to be, right? So I am the inheritor of my action. I must inherit the karma that I have accumulated. Everyone does evil with body, mouth, and mind. It is only when one realizes that one is inheritor of the evil actions that one will destroy or diminish such actions. So again, all the Buddha is trying to tell us is that we have to realize there's nobody else. There's nobody else in the universe that's creating the woes of our world, that's destroying our environment. That's me that's doing it. It's my actions. It's, we collectively, it's our actions, right? There's not an evil force out there that's doing all of this. It is us. It is humans. It's our greed. It's our desires. Just the past couple of days, you've seen the news about the boats off the coast of Vancouver Island, and how some of the containers were thrown into the ocean, and we have all these refrigerators that are washed ashore, and some of us might look at it and say, how dare those people spill the fridges into our waters. But it's the consumer who desires the fridges, that demands the fridges, and that's why they're on that boat to begin with. So, it's not like they're the bad ones, or it's us. It's all of us. And that's with everything. It's our actions. It's our karma, and nothing else that's creating our suffering. So the Buddha continued by telling his disciples, my disciple, as long as there is samsara, people cannot transcend old age, illness, and death. All are inheritors of their actions. And if one reflects on this constantly, one will be able to discover the path. And if one repeatedly practices the path, one can liberate oneself from the fetters and annihilate the defilements. So again, he's talking about the diligence of being mindful of the practice, always being mindful of not getting too attached, over-attached to these things, and realizing that, yes, they're good for now, but that will pass as well. Everything will pass. And understanding that and accepting that and being at peace with that is very important. So the final thing here, before we get to the Dhammapada, the Buddha, there's an episode where he talks with one of his older disciples. His name is Vakali. And Vakali was quite ill, and he asked the Buddha to pay a visit to him. And when the Buddha obliged, he visited him, Vakali expressed his regret of not being able to have an audience with the Buddha in a long time. So he was very sad that he couldn't make that journey to go and see the Buddha in such a long time. At which at which point the Buddha says to Vakali, Vakali, what good is there in seeing this decaying body? And he goes on then, he says, he who sees the Dharma sees me. He who truly sees me sees the Dharma. Seeing the Dharma, one sees me. And seeing me, one sees the Dharma. Vakali, is your body permanently existent or is it impermanent? And the Vakali responds, world honored one, the body is impermanent. Vakali, is your mind permanent or impermanent? World honored one, the mind is impermanent. Vakali, impermanence gives rise to pains. Painful things are without substantial self. Concerning things impermanent, it is not possible to say, this is mine or this is I. Thus, you should know things as they really are. Seeing in this way, the disciples of the teaching free themselves from body and mind. Liberating themselves from desire, they become aware of their liberation. With this awareness, they know that their lives of fetters have ended, that all that have to be done has been done, and there will be no more life in delusion. So this is actually a very famous passage, and in fact, the Buddha repeats this just upon before he passes away. He tells his disciples that, my final moments have come. And he says, but do not lament in vain. He says, because those who only, or he says, the physical body born from their parents and nourished by food must also decay and become old and decay. But he says, those who only see the physical self do not see the true Buddha. Those who see the Dharma see the true Buddha. So he says this again before he passed away, before the Buddha passed away. So this passage is a very, very important passage. And again, it's telling us, pointing us in the realization that even the Buddha must pass away. Even the enlightened one must pass away. That's the reality of our existence. But yet, at the same time, the Dharma, which is this oneness that exists, that continues on. And that is always striving to work to awaken us. And so, again, for what the Buddha is stressing is that, it's the Buddha, the finger pointing to the moon. What's important is to see the moon and not get hung up on the finger. Even the Buddha is that finger pointing to the moon. So what's important for us is to strive to understand the truth, the realization. Change happens. Change is reality. But that doesn't mean there's pleasure in the instance. But don't get hung up on that pleasure, right? This morning, I was watching CTV News this morning, and they were talking about the fact that because of the shipping woes that are going on throughout the world, that the Christmas shopping, you better get out and start shopping now because things are not going to be arrive if you don't go out and do your shopping now. This is putting people in a panic. People are saying, oh, I have to go run out and buy my shopping. And what's it all about? What's it all about? I'm sure, I think most of you were joined in my the Shotsky service where I paraphrased George Carlin, the comedian, about the fact that what we do is we collect stuff, right? And it's got to be my stuff because somebody else's stuff is not good stuff. It's my stuff, right? We criticize other people's stuff as junky. Well, he used some other phrases I won't use on this Zoom, but he says, basically my stuff, right? And I think he was very cognizant of the point of that. What's it all about? What's it all about? So I think as we go through these passages, that's what the Buddha is trying us trying to get us to think a little bit more about what's it all about. Things are going to change. Life is going to change. But what is it all about? And that's where the Dharma comes in. Because the Buddha says, there is peace. You can have peace by not getting attached to all these things that are external to us. But be focused on the fact that, yes, I can have pleasant thoughts right now. In this instant, I can have good moments. But realize that those are also fleeting and changing. And being accepting of those changes. Things will not always be the same. Anyways, so I did it again. We didn't get into the Dhammapada, but we are actually at the point of the Dhammapada. Okay, so next class, we will start off with the Dhammapada. And so for those of you who printed it off, please read it over and we'll start off. And as you can see, we're not going to get through this in 1 or 2 sessions because there's altogether 423 passages in here. But that's okay. That's okay. But we'll go through these Dhammapada. Okay. So thank you, everyone. And if you wanted, does anybody have any questions at this time? Actually, so, let me stop sharing. I'm going to just stop sharing. Stop sharing. And yeah, does anybody have any questions? Speak up. Go ahead and speak up if you have a question.
I have a question.
Yes, Les.
It's Les.
Yes. Hi, Les.
Hi. What does it mean when it says I must reach what I have not yet reached? What is it that?
Pardon me?
What is it that I have to reach? I'm not clear on exactly what that means.
Can you repeat the first part again?
I'm not clear on what it means. I must reach what I have not yet reached.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you. So basically what that is awakening to what we call enlightenment or seeing things as they truly are. Okay. So the point is the fact that you are in fear is that you still haven't awakened to the true reality. And so basically what he's saying is don't give up at that point. You know, you're going to encounter these hardships or difficulties, but don't give up. Be diligent and go through that. Focus on the Dharma. Focus on the teachings. Despite you'll come into obstacles in your life, but if you go through that, you will have a clarity of mind. Basically, you will have an understanding that comes about. And so actually there's 2 Japanese phrases that are very interesting. And they're similar, but they actually point to 2 different things. So the first saying is Mikkabozu. Mikkabozu is translated as 3-day monk. Okay, 3-day monk. Okay? So 3-day monk, Mikkabozu, when they call somebody Mikkabozu, it's somebody who gives up very easily. Okay. There's another saying, Ishi no ue ni 3 nen. Okay. So meditate on a rock for 3 years. Okay. And so in that phrase, they're saying that you will attain or achieve your goal by contemplating for 3 years. So diligence, basically. Okay. So that's actually one of the practices in Buddhism, or what we call the 6 paramitas, the 6 bodhisattva perfections. One of them is diligence. So all effort, right? So don't give up too easily, basically.
Okay.
Okay. So I know listening to me all these times, you must be thinking, oh, what's he talking about? but don't give up. Okay, don't give up.
Okay.
Thanks, Liz. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
A question.
Yes.
When the Dharma talks about trying to let go of like what am I trying to say now? Like when you cling to desires or you cling to things, that's bad. And I get that with material, like I get it in some aspects, but when it comes to things like your children, I don't understand how we're not supposed to cling to them. How are you supposed to just let that go? I don't understand. It's too deep in us.
Yes, and it's probably the most difficult thing to not cling to. But in the end, even our children, we have to let go of. And
but how do you not? I don't know. How do you not feel pain that way?
Well, you do feel pain, but if you have an understanding, okay, it doesn't mean pain will not visit. And the Buddha says this. He says there will be pain. Pain is caused because we are in existence of suffering. But there's a difference between just blind pain and pain with understanding. Okay. So yes, it's very difficult. But you're learning that this is the most difficult of difficulties in this life, is having to part with our loved ones, right? But at least you have an understanding that yes, this is actually part of our existence, even though it's so difficult for us. I think there's a difference between not having an understanding of that and having an understanding of it. Right? You can wallow and say, why is this happening to me? And you lose yourself completely. Whereas on the other hand, you understand, yes, it's tremendously painful to part with our loved ones. In fact, our bodies physically are affected by the loss of loved ones. But at the same time, you don't let that pain, you don't lose yourself in that pain if you have some kind of a guidance. So it's basically through that suffering that you're encountering, there is like a rudder that helps you, that continues, that allows you to move forward. Because sometimes if you don't have that guidance or rudder, you can get caught up in that pain and lose yourself. And so I think that's where the difference is. So the liberation in Buddhism is not liberation in that these things are not going to happen to you. It's not the saying, I'm going to take you out of here and make everything hunky-dory. But what it does do is it makes you a little bit more of a conscious individual, so that you're able to realize, yes, these pains that I'm feeling, you're able to deal with it. You realize that's part of what we call samsara, this existence of suffering. And I'm not the first and I'm not the last person that's going to go through this. And so as we continue to listen to the teachings, it gives us some kind of, I think in the darkest of times, you need something to grasp hold of. And I think that's what these teachings do allow us. It's not just, it's talking about reality and seeing things. And it helps us, I think, as we go through. I don't know if that helps you at all.
That's thank you.
Anybody else? If not, thank you, everyone. And so we'll start off with the Dhammapada next week then. Okay.
Thank you,
And,
Sensei.
Thank you, Sensei.
yeah, thank you. You know,
Thank you.
initially I said that this lecture will be 5 sessions, but we're already going on to number 4 next week. And we haven't even started where I wanted to start. So, but that's okay. You're used to it by now. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
Sensei.
you.
Bye.
Right.
Bye.